today. Thank you for having me. Great to be invited by London Historic Buildings Trust. So as Hannah mentioned, my name's Jess and I work for a charity called Refugee Education UK. I thought I would start by just introducing you to the charity so you get a sense of the work that we do. So our priority as a charity is to equip young refugees to build positive futures by thriving in education. So when young refugees are displaced from their country of origin, which often occurs through conflict, and they come to the UK, we find that they face a huge number of barriers to even entering the education system, let alone being able to engage well with it and to thrive within it. So we have several components that our work is based on. Our first focus is education access, so helping young refugees overcome those barriers to entry and helping them to be able to attend from primary school through to university. We focus on education outcomes, so not just getting young refugees through the door, but also helping them to thrive in education, to reach their academic potential, and to experience better social, emotional, and mental health. We also focus on educational impact. So we want all young refugees to have an opportunity to use their education and to help them create meaningful futures. So teaching them leadership skills and helping with pathways to employment. And we also believe in changing the landscape. So we do a lot of research and make policy recommendations and train other organisations with the hope of changing the landscape for young refugees trying to access education in the UK, in the hope that one day we won't be needed anymore. So that's a very brief overview of the charity. What we're here to talk about today is our engagement with this very beautiful heritage building. So as a charity, we currently work out of the Salvation Army building in Harlesden, which is based in Brent, northwest London. The Salvation Army have been fantastic landlords for us, and they've been very generous and affordable, but we have been aware for a season that we have kind of outgrown the space available to us in their building. They have a single meeting room, which makes it very difficult for us to do any of our confidential one-on-one mentoring with young refugees within that space. And also in 2019, the Salvation Army shared their plans with us that they're going to knock down the building we currently work out of, and they're going to rebuild it, a more purpose kind of built building for themselves. So from that point, as a charity, we started to look at the cost of renting office space in Brent, but this is actually, it's very high for a charity. And being aware that we were kind of coming up to the boundaries of the space available to us, we had been saving for a number of years. So we did actually have significant reserves built up in case that there came a season where we wanted to look at buying a building. So whilst we looked for rentable space, we also started to look in the local area about what buildings might be available to purchase. And one of the buildings we looked around was the building you can see in the picture on my slide, which is an interwar bank building on the High Street in Harlesden, which has most recently been an HSBC. So we were, RUK was founded in Harlesden, so it would be incredible for us to be able to work out of such a prominent building on the High Street and be so central within the community that we work in. That prospect was really exciting for us. However, the bank had been vacant for a number of years and was in a state of significant disrepair. So looking around it, there were mushrooms growing out of the carpets and the floor. There's black mold on a lot of the walls. We had a resident pigeon population in the attic. There are numbers of considerable challenges with the building. So that had, and the building, I should say, is locally listed by Brent. So it's not a grade 1 or a grade 2 building, but it is locally listed. So the plus side of the disrepair was that the purchase price of such a central building was actually within grasp for us as a charity. the flip side was that it meant we had a significant building project on our hands. And whilst we'd saved enough money to be able to buy a building, we hadn't saved enough to be able to do such a significant piece of renovation. Fantastically, we were aware that Brent Council offers funding via the Neighbourhood Community Infrastructure Levy. And so we got in touch with Brent very early on in the process when we were still considering whether or not we would be able to purchase the building. And Brent have been hugely encouraging and supportive to us through various ways and through various different funding opportunities. We explained to them that we hadn't even bought the building, but that we wanted to understand whether we would be able to raise funds to restore it and to renovate it. And they were really generous and said that we could apply for funding anywhere, despite the fact that we didn't own the building yet. So we applied to the NSOP, and through that we did a lot of engagement, and we did kind of put through our own networks, because many of us live in the Harlesden area, but also we did a lot of going from door to door, asking the local community for their insights, speaking to local businesses, speaking to local schools, because not only do we want the building to be a focus for our work with young refugees, we also want to provide a community space for the wider community of Harlesden. And we were really encouraged to receive such an overwhelmingly positive response through that exercise from the local community. And we took all of that and our funding application to Brent, and Brent put it forward to the Cabinet, and the Cabinet approved a grant of 366,000 for us, which was astonishing and incredible, particularly as it came before we'd even purchased the building, that funding would be available to us if we move forward for the project. And I think that gave us the confidence that we would be able to raise the money that we needed. So we purchased the building on the 6th of March in 2020. 2 weeks later, we went into a national lockdown, which has certainly complicated the process. But from the point where the charity knew that they were going to buy the building, they put out a job advert for a project manager to oversee the refurbishment process. And although I don't have any construction background, but I do have 10 years of project manager and stakeholder management experience, and I was really delighted to secure that job. So that's my role within the charity. I oversee our refurbishment process. So I wanted to show you a little bit of our plans for the building. We are very excited about what it means for the charity. So in this slide, you can see our plan. So it's a 5-story building. So I'm starting from the basement and working up. So this is the basement. So our plan is to have 2 community floors and 2 floors for co-working space. So this is one of our community floors. You can see here that we've retained the original vaults for the bank, and we're trying to work within that space. We did look at taking them out, but the vaults are actually structural, and that added a huge amount of cost. We'd have to put a lot of steel in, and steel is expensive at the moment. So we decided to retain the original vaults and actually use them, and we've taken off the massive steel doors, but we've kept the door frames, which are beautiful, and give a really nice feel to the space. So we're going to refurbish this to have kind of a football table within one of the small vaults. We'll have a recreational room within the large vault, with kind of sofas and comfortable seating for youth to hang out with. And we envisage this being both our young refugees, but also we want this space to be hireable by local youth groups and others to use this space for work that they want to do. We've got small booths down the left-hand side. There'll be study booths where young refugees can just kind of sit. We'll have tables that come down from the walls, so you can kind of tuck yourself away and have some private space. And those booths sit under light wells. So we're going to, originally there was Luxcrete in the pavement, which allows natural light into the basement. So we're going to restore those with a grant from Historic England, which is fantastic. So that will allow natural light to come into the basement. We've also got accessible showers and a toilet down here, and other more boring things like the plant room and a staff locker room. So that's our basement space. We then have the ground floor, and we've tried to keep the ground floor as kind of open plan as possible so that we can have a whole range of multi-purpose furniture that can fold down easily. So you'll see we've got a large storeroom in the corner on the right. So our plan is to have quite a wide range of collapsible furniture that can stay in the store, but which we will then bring out. So we've kind of worked with our architect. We can turn this into a gallery space. We can turn it into a kind of conference space for kind of 30 to 40 people. We can do the layout that's shown on screen here, which is kind of like a homework club layout, or we should be able to hire it for seminars and different things like that. And because it's such a fantastically tall ground floor, we're able to put in a mezzanine floor, which will sit over the little kitchen that we've got planned and over the disabled toilet. So we're going to have this mezzanine floor, which we're hoping will act as a bit of a kind of community lounge. So at the times when the building is open to the community, people will be able to come in and sit and get a coffee and engage with whatever community activity is being run at that point of day. So then we move on to our co-working floors. So our business model going forward is that we'll rent desk space to other charities or social enterprises who want to work in a space where they can engage with others who are like-minded and kind of share ideas. So we have some partners already who've committed to moving forward into the building with us. So one of them is a social enterprise called Jigsaw Consult. And so they will be the main tenant on this floor. But we also have a number, like 7 other rentable desks that we're looking for tenants for. You'll see we've really focused on having good meeting room space in the building. For us, that's a real priority so that we can do one work with young refugees. And it will be fantastic to be able to have that within our own premises, rather than that having to take place as it does at the moment in coffee shops or public spaces. It's much better for confidentiality if that can be done in a kind of secure environment. So we've got a couple of meeting rooms, a boardroom. These meeting rooms will be shared across the 2 floors. And on our second floor, we will have our UK desk spaces, and again, a couple of lettable desks and 2 further meeting rooms. We've got kitchenettes on the 1st and 2nd floor, and then the toilets are actually on the 1st floor for the co-working space. And then finally, we have the attic space. We haven't fully decided what this floor will be. It'll depend a little bit on demand for co-working spaces. Obviously, offices, there is potentially going to be a decline in the demand for office space, but we're actually hoping, because we're going to offer a really flexible model where people could come in and hire one desk for one day a week, or just hire the meeting rooms, that will actually be part of the solution for people who want more flexible working between home, but also want to be able to get their teams together at various points. So depending on the demand for office space, we may open up the attic as an office, or we may keep it as a hireable space. Again, another kind of community space which you can hire and use. So those are our plans for the building, which we're really excited about. Done my project stages. I'm going to come back to funding in a second, actually. So in terms of how we went about our project, we started with a base design. As you can see, we've come up with a really fit for purpose space. We spent a lot of time thinking with our architects about what we needed, about what we thought would benefit the community and those we serve. And we did that in consultation with our key partners. So with people like Jigsaw Consult, who I already mentioned, who have kind of said they would like to be tenants within the building. We then took our base design forward to planning. Planning for heritage, or well, we sit within a conservation area in Brent. And so when I read Brent's planning application portal, there were a whole load of different things that we had to do. I think I had assumed that a planning kind of application was just one application, but actually there are a number of different things that you need to provide. I think I came up with a list of 9 potential different external reports that we would need to put forward based on my initial assessment of that. So I'll come back to it when I give my advice for what I think you should do if you are taking on a heritage project later. But yeah, it certainly surprised me how many different reports were required. So we went through our planning process. We actually did a really early tender because we wanted to understand whether our initial projections for the construction were about right or not. So we did an early tender just based on the architect's drawings, which turned out to be a very misleading process. Our problem had been that because we were in national lockdown, a lot of the consultants that we'd lined up to come and see the building weren't able to come. So I had lots of people kind of booked in for March as soon as we had the building who were due to come and give us advice on the building. And I would recommend that you get as many advisors as possible to look around. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. So we did this initial tender and it came out as 400 to 600K. And we thought we were doing really well with our fundraising, given that ENSL had given us such a generous grant to start with. It's turned out that our full scheme is more like 1.8 million. So we we discovered this and discovered we had a lot of fundraising to go at one point. So we had some really helpful feedback from various pro bono consultants and funders along the way. So we had the head of one of the big UK development firms came and looked around the building for us, and he said, his immediate response was, I think you're skimping on your design team. You really need you need a quantity surveyor, you need a mechanical and electrical engineer, and you need a structural engineer. So we went away and got those all in place. And the Architectural Heritage Fund, who'd come on board as another big funder at that point, also said that they would recommend that we do a re-before tender package, which is a much more detailed level of architect's drawings. It's much more specific and takes a lot of risk out of the tendering process because you've really detailed to a very granular level what you require. So that was our next step. Concurrently with planning, we worked on our re-before tender package. And we also decided to do an early strip out of the building. So the building was full of, well, there were lots of internal walls that we weren't going to need, small partition walls. There was also some items in the basement that we did want to take out, some particular safes and things like that, and the big doors that led to the bolts. We also just wanted to take down we had suspended ceilings in the building. We wanted to get those down because they were very damaged and really understand what the beams look like for the ceiling. And I would really, for us, doing a strip out was a really wise move. It then allowed us to do proper damp surveys and really understand the condition of the building. So our next move was to go out to tender, and we got really positive feedback from the contractors that they could see the bones of the building well and understand how to move forward. To tender, we did a mix of things. We found different people ourselves. We took advice from our quantity surveyor. And we also had a speculative contractor approach us. Because they're a local contractor who does schemes of this size and have worked with heritage funders before. So we did a short list of contractors. We did something called a Pre-Qualification Questionnaire, which our QS advised us on, asking all different questions about the size of the company, their fit, looking at other projects they've worked on that are similar, understanding their financial position. And that was a really helpful and insightful exercise. There were contractors who I'd really liked when I spoke to and showed around the building. And it turned out that actually when you asked more about their financials, their turnover was nowhere near what, even our scheme alone. So actually they weren't at all suitable. So we were really able to whittle down the top 4 contractors that we wanted to take forward. So that was really helpful. We finished contracting at the end of March. And we've just entered into the process of doing some value engineering, analysing those tenders, and we're hoping to move forward with contracting potentially even this week. Yeah, so that's been our kind of project stages journey. Oh, sorry, let me just flip back to the fundraising. So fundraising, as I mentioned, we had a steep upward curve. There were certain items that we hadn't anticipated being part of the design that came out later that would be really helpful. So in light of the coronavirus, we started to consider whether we needed to mechanically ventilate the building. Actually, Harlesden has one of the most polluted high streets in the country. And unfortunately, the building sits right outside a major traffic lights. And we kind of got to the stage where we realized we were going to have to put a full mechanical ventilation system into the building. But because the fabric of the building would just leak energy, basically. It's a single skin brick building, and the windows are in quite a bad state of disrepair. So in order to put in a mechanical ventilation system, we've had to work on the fabric of the building, which has been fantastic because one of our trustees' main considerations was that we looked to develop the building as sustainably as possible, so that going forward we would be environmentally sustainable. So that kind of, those two things came together, but that does add a lot of cost to the scheme because we're also fully replacing the windows with timber framed double glazing. We are putting a new skin throughout the building to insulate it properly. So just items like this added huge amounts of money into the scheme. So we've been really lucky. We've had fantastic success with funders. We've been funded, and the fantastic thing for us is that some of the funders would be funders we've approached anyway because they're charity funders, and they already know us and they knew our work and they were excited that we were doing a capital project. But the flip side of it is that because it is a heritage building, we've also been able to approach heritage funders, which has been wonderful because they have a whole range of kind of advice for us that's been really helpful about how to go about the project. We've really learned from them, and that's been very helpful. And they've also been incredibly generous with what they've given us. So you'll see here, we've got, I mean, just listed here are 12 different funders. Only 3 of those are individuals. The rest are all different trusts and foundations that we've been able to apply to. So, I mean, just a quick run through, we had the ENSEL funding. I've also already mentioned the Architectural Heritage Fund have given us a huge grant. Historic England have been incredibly supportive through their house scheme. We've got funding from the Cloth Workers Foundation, the Lang Family Trust and All Churches, Jigsaw Consult, who I mentioned are our tenants, wanted to give to the building because they wanted to help it be sustainable. And then we've had some incredible major donations just from individuals who we've talked to about our work and who have been excited about the project. The Bernard Sunley Foundation and Garfield Weston have all given us really generous grants. And then we've done some of our own events, although those were really curtailed by COVID. So you'll see in total, we've raised about 1.5 million, which I don't think at the beginning of this journey, any of us would ever have thought was possible. We really didn't think we would need that much money, but we also, I don't think we'd have dreamt that it was possible to raise that much money. So that's been a great journey and learning experience for the charity. You'll see here, there's a line that says underwriting. A local church who has been following our journey very closely has offered us from individuals £200,000 of money that basically, if we have to use it, we can use it, but otherwise we'll keep fundraising with the hope that we don't have to ask them for that money. But that just allows us to enter into a contract now, which is fantastic, because now we've tendered, it would be best to move forward before prices change. So that's our kind of current funding position. Lessons learned, many, but I think the key ones would be to have the right design team. Having people who are really on your side is essential. We've had a fantastic design team. Our architects have done lots of work on heritage buildings, but they aren't heritage accredited architects. And I think now, with the experience we've had with various funders, it would have been better if we'd had a heritage accredited architect. So, I mean, we can't regret them because they've been wonderful, but equally, that would be my advice for someone starting from scratch. If you don't have good construction experience, then I think a quantity surveyor is essential. Since we've had our quantity surveyor on board, it's been a lot clearer what the project costs were going to be. That has been realistic. In fact, his initial pre-tender estimate has been pretty much spot on. That's given us much more confidence when approaching funders and being able to say, you know, these are the true costs. Here's the long report that shows the breakdown of that. That's been really helpful. Planning permission, I would definitely do a pre-application, and if you can hire a planning agent, that is really helpful. We had, I mean, because we're a charity, we speak to people about what we do all the time, and actually we had a planning agent offer to do that for us for free. They wrote a 15-page document that I would never have been able to come up with, and really helped me coordinate all the different reports. So that was fantastic. I mean, I'm just going to jump back to when I say the right design team. We were really hesitant about spending money on design. I think we thought it was an area where we could potentially save money, or we just didn't really understand what proportion of a project you needed to spend on your design team. And actually for us, it's kind of working out at 7 to 10% of the overall project. It has been a lot of money, but it's been much better once we had all the different kind of expertise on board. That has really helped us. So I would recommend taking the plunge and spending a decent amount of money on design. I guess our other learning point is that the cost of making heritage buildings more sustainable can be significant. But I mean, what we've learned is essentially that improving the fabric of the building is the best way to go about that. And I've kind of outlined how we're doing that already. So I think those are my main lessons learned. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, so I thought I'd step back actually to the end of March when we received our tenders to talk a little bit about the journey that Nicola and Chris have kind of touched upon, of how things can take time, but how they can also change dramatically. So we received our tenders at the end of March. We had 4 contractors tender, and 3 of them came in well over our budget. We had tendered for, we have the full scheme, which is what I showed you earlier, but we had included some value engineering options within our tenders because we suspected it would be more expensive than we could afford. So we've done things like asked the contractors to take out the attic conversion, the sum for that works, and then give us a sense of the time saving as well on the overall programme if we did that. We'd ask them to do the same for a basic attic refurbishment, so a kind of a very light touch and not doing things like putting the nice windows within the vault walls, which will involve some steel. So we had different value engineering options within our tender, and it looked like one of the contractors would be affordable for the very basic refurbishment package. That was the first view when we opened the tenders. Then we did, I should say our lovely quantity surveyor did the post-tender equalisation exercise, which is where he took all of the tenders and he compared each and every individual budget line just to check that the budget lines made sense, that the contractor that came in lowest hadn't just kind of come up with figures out of thin air that didn't make sense with where, amongst the other costs for each individual budget line. And also checked for where contractors had added costs from things they'd observed when they came around the building. We had really good engagement with our tender in terms of contractors sending different people out to the building. We had lots of site visits, which is great because you feel like people have really engaged with your space. So we did this post-tender equalisation, which made our bottom contractor look slightly more expensive by the end of that. So I was writing a slightly depressing paper for our board, with lots of risks in it and a fairly chunky gap, even for the bottom rung of what we were hoping to achieve. And incredibly, our miracle, to use Nicola's term, was that we got an anonymous donation a couple of weeks ago from an individual of £300,000, which completely changed everything for us. So that has, I rewrote my board paper and changed my risk spec, which was an incredible moment. So yeah, that has opened up the full scheme to us, which is brilliant. We are, costs seem to move fairly rapidly around different budget lines. So we're still doing some value engineering just to make sure that we're spending the money that we have wisely. We have just gone through a process of making sure that lots of funders have different requirements and things have to happen before contracting. So various funders have things like authorization to start forms. We need to make sure that we're not double counting any of our budget lines between our funders. So we're kind of divvying up the scheme, working out who's funding what. So we've been doing that process over the last couple of weeks. And yeah, but we are moving towards contracting, and we do have a draft contract in circulation, which is very exciting. I think it's being sent to the contractors today. So our objectives moving forward are ensuring that the work's carried out well. So for me, that will be doing a lot of engagement between the different parties. We've asked the contractors to take on some portions of design. So they'll be doing the REBA stage 4B drawings for the mechanical and electrical works. So we'll need to carefully review those. Obviously, we'll be having our QS and architect, structural engineer and mechanical and electrical engineer down to site to review the works at various points. I'm working with a quantity surveyor who's not worked on a similar project before in terms of having so many different funders. So we're currently working out what his reports to me will need to look like so that I can report well to our funders. Some funders want to see specific invoices for each of their line items. Others are happy with the kind of general QS tender report, which says how much has been spent and how much you owe the contractor each month to date. So we're just kind of working through those details. So how we report to each of our funders well, and making sure that we're on track for that. That includes things like spending money on time. So depending on when we were given funding, depends on when the end date for that funding is. So for example, Historic England really kindly gave us an uplift for money they had left over in their pot last year, but that needs to be spent by the end of June. And we're hoping to get to site in June, but it does mean that we're lining up with certain kind of suppliers to say we'd like to put in an early order for the windows. So can you be ready to receive that and to invoice for that, so that we're just spending money at the right point in our works. So we're doing a lot of cash flow modelling as well, because some of our funders have given us unrestricted funds, which is really helpful. And then others have given us line by line funds, which is also amazing. But it's just balancing your cash flow between the unrestricted funds that you can use to purchase items that will then be paid for by another funder once you've submitted the invoice. So we're doing some cash flow modelling at the moment, which is fun. And yeah, so we're hoping that our contractors will arrive on site kind of around the end of June, and that we're hoping to complete in March 2020. So that's a brief overview of where we are. I don't know if anyone has any questions based on either what I've just said or what we were talking about earlier.
I think stunned silence at your donation.
We were stunned too.
We track this person down. Amazing. Thank you, Jess. Yeah, does anyone have any questions, final thoughts for Jess?